Hi everyone, welcome to Deep Tech Forum. And today we are very honored to have Mark Mattingly Scott, the Principal and Ambassador Leader EMA and IAP of IBM Quantum. So Mark, where are you now today?
I'm in Germany at home, in Heidelberg.
Nice.
Beautiful
Right.
Heidelberg.
Beautiful place, I heard. So without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, I'll pass the stage to Mark.
So, just a quick check. You're seeing my presentation, I hope. Okay. So, yeah, my name is Mark Mattingly Scott. That's kind of obvious that that's a very British name. But I live in Germany. I moved here 31 years ago to work for IBM and to be something like a midwife for the World Wide Web, which was just in its infancy at that time. Since then, I've been occupied and working on all sorts of disruptive technologies throughout the 31 years. And since 2016, what IBM calls a quantum computing ambassador. It's our job to talk about quantum computing and make quantum computing people more aware of quantum computing, its potential, and what it's about. Up to now, with classical computers, so it doesn't matter if it's a mainframe or my Apple Watch, classical computers work on the basis of ones and zeros. And in a way, if we look at humanity and humanity's history, the pace and way human society, human economies, human tools, technologies evolves, goes in lockstep with the technological capabilities that we have. This is known as co-evolution. In anthropology, it's known as co-evolution. But we can also turn that around. In a sense, the society we live in, the tools we have, the things we can do, the way the economy works, the way business works, the way transport works, where everything works, is a reflection of, an indirect reflection of the capabilities and limits of the technologies we have available. Quantum computing is a fundamentally new way of doing computing, with some very, very interesting capabilities and potential in the way we can speed things up. And I believe that quantum computing will affect a fundamental change, very deep changes in everything we do and how we do it. If we look at business, hard problems are everywhere. It's the nature of business that the technology we have limits the hardest problems we can solve. And we've been using computers since their very early days to solve such hard problems. Today, for the first time, we've now got access to quantum computers, which will probably be able to help us significantly advance how we work in these areas. If we look, for example, at agriculture, the agribusiness, nitrogen fixation for creating ammonia fertilizers using nitrogen fixation directly. There are people looking at using nitrogenase, which is energetically much more efficient to produce fertilizer. If we look at the area of catalysts in carbon dioxide capture, in certain battery technologies, in hydrocarbon refining. There are a lot of problems here which may well be significantly accelerated by by access to quantum computers. A further area which is of significant interest is in the area of optimization, particularly in financial markets, looking at risk analysis, portfolio optimization, and finally, if we look at the pharmaceutical industry, then the potential and possibility for personalized medicine, for new kinds of antibiotics, for new kinds of cures for diseases may well be achievable using quantum computers. How do we actually get there, though? And in the early 1960s at IBM, the idea that classical computing as we know it, actually increases something called the entropy of the universe every time a bit is processed irreversibly. This was a result determined by and derived by an IBMer back in 1961, the year I was born. In the 70s, this idea was extended also at IBM to the idea that any computer program, any computable computer program, can be rewritten so it's reversible. This is a very kind of almost like an esoteric result. But what those two things meant was that if you could take a computer program, rewrite it so it is reversible, then it might be a candidate to be run on a quantum mechanical system. Because quantum mechanics, one of the characteristics of quantum mechanics is that you don't want to consume any energy, you don't want to increase the entropy of the universe. And it was in the early 1980s that this vision of the capability of having quantum mechanical computers first became feasible. And in the years since the early 1980s, we, as well as many others, have been working on developing such quantum computing systems. If we look at this is a picture of a quantum computer chip, of a qubit, actually of 2 qubits, we can see there. We use microwaves to excite, change, and read out the value of the qubits. Qubits are stored in a small superconducting circuit. Basically, this is a small cloud of electrons. Because they're superconducting, they behave as though they were one single electron. A physicist called Wolfgang Pauli proved in I think in the 1940s, after the Second World War, that the simplest quantum mechanical system is the spin of an electron. With these qubits, we can basically simulate or trick a cloud of electrons to behave like a single electron, and we can manipulate the spin of that electron, and thus we can use it as a computational unit, as a qubit. Qubits are fundamentally different from classical bits. The classical bit, you can represent a state as either a 0 or a 1. And in a qubit, we can represent the state as what's called a complex linear combination of a 0 and a 1. Essentially, if you imagine the qubit as a sphere, and the classical 0 and 1 that we know about are the North and the South Pole, a qubit can actually take a state which is any point on the surface of the sphere. And that is known as superposition. That's one of the 3 fundamental principles of quantum computing. The second principle is something that is very much non-classical. Einstein was unhappy about it. He called it spooky action at a distance. And it's known as entanglement. And entanglement is where we take 2 qubits and make the state of one qubit dependent on the state of another qubit. In other words, they are no longer separate quantum mechanical systems, but they are intimately linked. The third principle of quantum computing is known as interference. And what we do is, and you can see this on the right, we can combine qubits and operations on those qubits in such a way as to put it very simply, to reinforce the right answers and suppress the wrong answers. And essentially with those three principles, with those three effects, we can build a quantum circuit. The challenge and the creative force and creativity of designing quantum algorithms comes into play when we take a problem, which we have, and translate it into such a circuit. The analogy with classical computing is taking a problem and translating it into an electronic circuit. We do that, by the way, every time we do anything with a computer. Inside the computer is a classical circuit with gates, conceptually not so far away from quantum gates. Interestingly, in also post-war, a physicist called John von Neumann developed an architecture, if you like, of a universal computer. It's known today as the von Neumann machine. The von Neumann machine, you have concepts such as a processing unit, memory, an arithmetic unit. Almost every computer on the planet is based on this von Neumann architecture, and it's known as a universal architecture. With it, you can do anything classically. In a twist of paradoxical twist of physics and theoretical computer science, it was proven some time ago that a universal quantum architecture, quantum computer, actually exists, but we still don't know what it looks like. That may sound strange, but that's the way it is, and that strangeness is typical of quantum computing. We're on the search for that, on the lookout for it, and that's one of the major areas in which we are investigating how to develop quantum algorithms. Basically, though, with the quantum computer, you can do a variety of problems, solve a variety of problems. The simplest, of course, is you can simulate the real world. You can simulate physics, chemistry, pharmaceuticals, anything that's molecular or to do with materials. The second area where you can apply quantum computers through a particular kind of transformation is in solving what are called linear systems. And you see these a lot in machine learning, in artificial intelligence, in certain types of optimization problem. And the third area is in the area of what's called quantum walks, where you can basically solve large network problems. For example, the MIT and the Lawrence Berkeley Laboratory are simulating heavy ion collisions, which are useful in fundamental physics. But also I'm looking at many body systems with Los Alamos. Many body systems are also very interesting in the area of materials development. If we look a little bit closer to home, where are quantum computers being investigated today? And I have to be very careful about my choice of words here, discerning between investigated and used. Quantum computers and quantum computing is still in the research phase. So what we're talking about here are just basically examples. When we get to the right number of qubits, then these examples will become commercially viable. Daimler in Germany is using quantum computing to look at the properties of crystalline materials, including battery materials, paints and surfaces, but also looking at optimization in manufacturing processes. JP Morgan Chase, a large investment bank, developed an algorithm to optimize European option pricing. One of many applications in the finance sector. And indeed, we see, I don't think it's quite one new scientific paper per day, but it's pretty close, a huge rise in the amount of research, published research being done using quantum computers. And finally, ExxonMobil in the energy sector, the use of quantum computers to observe, optimize, and predict thermodynamic observables, which is something that's very useful in the petrochemicals industry. what are the characteristics of making a quantum computer relevant to industry, though? There are three things we need to be concerned about here. The first is the quality of the qubits. How good are the quantum circuits that we're using? What is their fidelity? What is their coherence time? How long do they hold a quantum state for? What is the capacity of the quantum computer? How many qubits do we actually have? And what is the variety? Can we, do we have a universal quantum computer where we have gates and can do arbitrary operations on those qubits, or are we restricted in some way? Around September of last year, IBM published our roadmap for hardware for the development of quantum systems. And a few weeks ago, we extended that with our roadmap for the software development environment. We predict, or we intend to get to over 1,000 qubits within the next 2 years. Currently, we have 127 qubit systems, and we intend to get to over 400 qubit systems next year. As I said, 2023, we're looking at over 1,000 qubits. And we're pretty confident that by the end of this decade, we will be having 1 million plus qubits. With 1 million plus qubits, and assuming that at some point in the future we get to the point where we have error correction, then a whole class of algorithms, a whole class of problems will be solvable. From the software side, it's key to understand the software ecosystem. The fundamental level, designing circuits for a quantum computer is akin to software developers who work on, for example, the Linux kernel. So they're deep in the guts of the machine. But if we look at how quantum computers will actually be used at some point in the future, then we want to abstract away the details of actually using a quantum computer and be able to have developers use the power of a quantum computer without really knowing that they're doing that. And the focus in the next couple of years is going to be on algorithm developers, so people developing algorithms for what we call model developers. And they're going to be the people actually using the quantum computer to solve real world problems. If we look back at the recent past, IBM and our partners have published over 400 scientific papers. As I mentioned, quantum computing is a research topic at the moment, with a very strong focus on building an ecosystem. And one of the advantages of that ecosystem, I'd like to illustrate here, is where within our IBM quantum network, which is our ecosystem, we see a very high degree of collaboration and development of new approaches, new algorithms, new methods, both between IBM and members of the ecosystem and between members of the ecosystem and each other. The whole thing is based on open source software. And we've also seen in the recent past, and some of you may have heard this, 2 announcements recently where we are actually installing and building quantum computers in both in Germany and in Japan. In Germany at Germany's Institute for Applied Research, the Fraunhofer Institute. The computer is installed and running in Ehningen in Stuttgart, which is about 120 kilometers, 130 kilometers from where I am. And we're in the process of building the quantum computer that's going to be sitting in Tokyo and made available through University of Tokyo research. At that point, I think I'd like to stop. And Rico, if I'm not mistaken, we now have some time for some Q&A.
Yes. So, Mark, with the development of IBM in quantum computing, what are the challenges that you will foresee happening in the next 5 years in this sector?
I think one of the challenges is developing and extending the hardware. So you saw our hardware roadmap. We predict, or we're fairly optimistic, very optimistic that we're going to be getting to plus 1,000 qubits within the next 2 years.
Yeah.
I mentioned the idea of error correction, which gets us from what we call NISQ, noisy intermediate scale quantum computers, NISQ, which are the machines we have today. With error correction, we get from NISQ to error corrected quantum computers, which opens up a whole new domain of algorithms we can access and use. There's a good chance that's going to happen this decade. Error correction is not easy, but that's one of the challenges we're working on. The other challenge is around how do we actually use it in real life? How do we combine quantum computers with classical computing? And there are analogies, there are precedents using GPUs, using FPGAs, using accelerators. These are all it's going to be similar, at least initially. And then the third area, of course, is what effect will this have on business? If you imagine that there are quantum computers and algorithms which can significantly speed up optimization problems, maybe not all optimization problems, but a significant subset of optimization problems, and you then examine all industries and ask yourself, where in this industry, where in this customer does optimization play a role in core value creation? Then you have to look really hard to find an industry or a customer where that's not the case. So quantum computing is going to have a huge impact. Assessing, predicting, preparing for that impact, and the concurrent societal impact, that's also a major challenge.
So having noted that the hardware could be a challenge, and also the fact that the integration and transformation into the real life usage of the quantum computing, if we were to achieve above 1,000 qubits speed, like significantly, a lot of gadgets and security fraction on data could be a risk, I would assume, because the speed is extremely fast. What is your view on that?
Yeah, so the performance of quantum computers, it depends on many things. It depends on the number of qubits, obviously, but it also depends heavily on the fidelity of those qubits, how good they are. Yeah. Qubits only hold their quantum state for a particular amount of time, and then they basically descend into noise, and we call that the coherence time. Manipulating a qubit, actually doing something to a qubit, also takes a certain amount of time. We call that the gate time. And the relationship between the coherence time and the gate time, the ratio is key, because that gives you a measure of how much you can do before you lose quantum state. And additionally, quantum qubits that are implemented in hardware are inherently error prone. They lose their state in a particular way, and we need those error rates, particularly for the readout. And when you combine qubits with interference, with entanglement, those error rates also need to be as low as possible. Looking at those different figures of merit, if you will, IBM encapsulates those, or actually IBM and several others encapsulate those into a figure of merit called the quantum volume. And the quantum volume gives you an idea of how powerful a quantum computer is. We're doubling the quantum volume of our computers every year so far. Actually, we're exceeding that. That you can look at where the quantum volume is going and what kind of performance you're going to need to solve particular problems for your industry or for you as a customer, and then join the lines, if you like, and you'd be surprised that quantum computing is approaching much faster than a lot of people think.
So for a lot of younger viewers out there who are very interested in the quantum computing, who might be in the universities or just step into the working force, what would be your advice to them in terms of the quantum computing involvement potentially for them?
I would say there are a lot of open source and free, publicly available learning assets out there. Not selling too much for IBM, but IBM, obviously, we have a very significant amount of publicly available information. Just go to quizkit.org. There's an entire university lecture series on there for free. All the code is open source. There's a textbook, but others do offer this as well. There are also a number of universities offering both free, publicly available vocational courses and now also full, master's courses. And some universities, the first ones, also offering electives in bachelor's. So there's a lot of educational material out there, from free open source textbooks to full masters in quantum computing. There is plenty of information if you want to learn about it.
So from your point of view, Mark, some people might fear that when quantum computing age comes more, realistically and more significant, there may be a lot of people losing their job to machines learning, AI, whatnot. But however, on the other hand, what are the potential new job opportunities or new career pathway for in quantum computing that you will foresee happening in the next few years?
Okay. I'll give you two answers to this. The first one is based on my, if I had hair, it would be gray. I've been working for IBM for 31 years. I've revealed the year I was born in. So I'm turning 60 this year. I've seen a lot of technologies. I've experienced them firsthand, including the World Wide Web, but also mobile technologies, these kind of things. AI, big data. There is always a fear of this will take jobs away, and I understand that. However, experience has taught me and has shown us as a society, as a human race, that technology changes. It doesn't delete. It changes the jobs. It changes the roles. Who would have thought back in 1996 when I worked on around the very first e-commerce platform on the planet. If somebody explained to me that back then about Amazon or what an SEO is, I probably would have got it. But there are jobs and roles and things that we do today which were unimaginable 20 years ago. And I think the same is going to be true of quantum computing. We will see completely new jobs. What I would say to the younger people watching, there is a lot of potential to do some very valuable, very interesting, and very rewarding work in the development of quantum circuits, quantum algorithms, and applications which leverage the power of quantum computers. I wouldn't be at all worried.
Thank you very much, Mark. I think thank you for joining us and sharing your experience and knowledge in this
My pleasure.
area. And we look forward to have you in the next session as well in the future.
My
Have a
pleasure.
nice day over there, Mark. Thank you.
Bye-bye.